Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at a story today that, well, pretty much everyone thinks they know, right? Noah's flood.
Mm-hmm.
For so many of us, it's that childhood story, the cartoon arc, animals two by two.
Yeah, the friendly version.
Exactly. But what if we told you that really digging into the core chapter, Genesis chapter 7, the one describing the main event, reveals something way more complex, just packed with incredible depth
That's it. It's not just about rain. It's about huge things.
Yeah.
Universal judgment, specific salvation, these deep spiritual conflicts running underneath.
and lessons for us today. Surprisingly relevant stuff.
Absolutely. Genesis 7 is where it all happens, really. God's specific instructions to Noah, Noah's unique place in this incredibly corrupted world. Then getting into the ark, the flood itself, the sheer power of it.
And as the material we've been digging into shows, this chapter is just loaded with symbolism, typology, strong connections to God, humanity, Satan, and, well, ultimately pointing towards Jesus.
Yeah, layers upon layers.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to peel back those layers, go beyond just the surface story, and find those profound nuggets of knowledge hidden in this ancient text.
See what it tells us about what was really at stake back then.
Right. And how those same kind of spiritual battles echo through history, and maybe how understanding all this might challenge and, inform you listening right now.
Okay, so Genesis 7. To really get it, we need to understand the why. Why did this flood even happen?
Yeah, the backstory is crucial. The sources we looked at spent a lot of time setting that scene, describing a world that had just gone completely off the rails.
Off the rails is putting it mildly. It wasn't just like a few bad apples. The corruption was everywhere, deep down in the core of what it meant to be human then.
The text describes it as every thought of their imagination is wicked or evil continuously. Just think about that.
Yeah, not just bad actions, but their thoughts, their imaginations constantly evil. It speaks to this fundamental twisting of the human heart and mind.
And the sources trace this right back to the beginning, don't they? To the fall in Eden.
Exactly. That moment, humanity chose its own way over God's. Remember, God warned Adam and Eve, if they ate the fruit, you shall surely die.
Hmm.
And our material points out, yeah, physical death eventually came, but something else died right there, instantly, something spiritual.
They felt naked, suddenly aware of being separated from God, that loss of innocence.
Yes, that spiritual connection was broken. It wasn't just biology. Their very nature got corrupted, leaving them wide open to this pervasive wickedness that followed.
And this downward spiral wasn't just human failure, was it? The sources bring up that really unsettling part from the chapters right before Genesis 7, the fallen angels mixing with humans.
Right, this is the bit that often gets skipped in Sunday school. The text mentions sons of God, which our sources interpret as these divine or angelic beings, seeing human women, finding them beautiful.
And taking them as wives.
Yes. And from those unions came offspring called giants, or Nephilim in some texts. Men of renown, the scripture says.
And our sources really speculate about who these giants and their angelic fathers were, not just big guys.
No, the idea explored is if their fathers were angelic, maybe they had abilities, knowledge, way beyond normal human capacity.
Like what?
Well, the sources talk about maybe manipulating matter, understanding physics we don't grasp, perceiving reality differently, like understanding higher dimensions maybe. One source even compares it to like higher math or how Jesus could appear in a locked room after the resurrection.
Wow. So more than just a physical thing, it was a transfer of forbidden knowledge, forbidden power.
That's the suggestion, that these fallen angels were teaching humans things they shouldn't know, mystery secrets, enchantment, sorceries, even incantations against God.
What was the goal?
It seems, according to the sources, it wasn't just personal gratification. It was about actively messing up God's creation, corrupting it, polluting it, and, crucially, elevating humans, or these hybrid beings, to challenge God's authority.
It sounds exactly like the original lie in Eden. Satan saying, "You will be like God."
That's precisely how it's presented. The core problem driving all this wickedness was this desire to push God out, to take his place. One source puts it really bluntly. False religion always tries to produce you in the place of God.
People wanting to be their own little God.
Yeah, obsessed with money, greed, power, control. Instead of reflecting God's image, they wanted to replace him. This whole era is even called the Age of Disobedience's Glory. It got so bad, God looked down and essentially said, I have to start over. I have to destroy man that I created. The corruption was just total.
But even in all that darkness, the universal corruption, that angelic interference, God finds one person, Noah.
Yes, amidst all that, God found Noah, and the text is specific about why. He was righteous, upright, and this is key, perfect in his generation.
And the sources dig into that phrase, perfect in his generation. It's not just saying he was a good dude morally, right? There's more to it.
According to the speculation presented, yeah, it might imply something more specific, maybe even genetic. The theory is that it meant his bloodline, his lineage, hadn't been corrupted by that fallen angel interference, unlike pretty much everyone else around him.
He was genetically pure in that sense.
That's the idea explored, free from that specific tampering that was apparently widespread.
Which brings up a really interesting point from the material,
Yeah.
maybe a bit uncomfortable. The text only says Noah was perfect in his generation.
Right.
It doesn't explicitly say that about his wife or his sons or their wives.
Exactly. And the sources hint this detail could be really significant later for understanding things that happen after the flood. Maybe even that weird incident between Noah and his son Ham.
Huh. It adds complexity, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It's not just a simple good versus evil story.
definitely not. So you've got this incredibly corrupt world, and God reaches out to the one man whose family line, at least through him, is untainted. And he speaks. This is where Genesis 7 really kicks off, with God's command.
Direct command.
Yeah, go into the boat with all your family. Or another version says, come thou and all thy house into the ark. It's a specific invitation. God's provision for salvation from the judgment he's about to bring, but it requires Noah and his family to obey.
And then the instructions about the animals, which, again, isn't quite the simple 2x2 picture we often have.
No, the text specifies 7 pairs of every clean animal and 7 pairs of the birds, but only 1 pair of the unclean animals.
7 pairs versus 1 pair. Why the difference?
The sources are pretty clear on this. It's directly linked to the need for sacrifice after the flood. The animals that were considered clean, approved for eating and for sacrifice, were needed in greater numbers.
So even before the flood hits, the plan includes providing for worship and atonement afterwards. That whole concept of sacrifice, of blood being shed, is already there.
Absolutely. It's a huge theme right from the start.
Yep.
Think about Eden. After the fall, God covers Adam and Eve with animal skins. Something had to die to provide that covering.
Right. Cain and Abel, too. Abel's animal sacrifice accepted, Cain's plants rejected.
Exactly. And here on the ark, you have these animals specifically designated for sacrifice, making sure that way of relating to God, of dealing with sin would continue. And the sources emphasize this whole thread points forward.
To Jesus.
To the Lamb of God, yeah. Jesus Christ, whose sacrifice is seen as the ultimate fulfillment of this need for redemption through shed blood. So, these clean animals on the ark, they're seen as a type, a foreshadowing of that ultimate lamb.
That's a powerful connection running all the way through. And we see that number 7, again, 7 pairs of clean animals, 7 pairs of birds, and God gives Noah a 7-day warning before the rain.
The sources definitely note the repetition of 7. It often pops up in scripture related to God's timing, completion, maybe perfection.
Okay.
It marks key moments here.
And the purpose for taking the animals is stated clearly, right? To ensure that every kind of living creature will survive, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth.
Yeah, it wasn't just about saving Noah's family. It was God's plan to preserve life itself, to restart creation on a cleansed earth.
But alongside that preservation plan comes the warning. Very direct.
Unmistakable. 1 week from today, I will begin 40 days and 40 nights of rain, and I will wipe from the earth all the living things I've created. Another translation says, I'll make a clean sweep of everything that I've made. No doubt about it, universal judgment was coming.
So, facing this unbelievable command, this terrifying warning,
Yeah.
What does Noah do?
It's so simple, but so profound. The text just says, so Noah did exactly as the Lord had commanded him, or Noah did according unto all that the Lord commanded him. Just complete obedience.
And we need to remember, like the sources point out, this wasn't just packing a bag and walking onto a waiting ship.
No way.
Noah had to build this thing, this massive ark,
Yeah.
based on God's instructions.
It was a colossal undertaking. The material mentions it was built from gopher wood. The estimated size, based on the cubits, is staggering, maybe 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high. Imagine building that back then.
And the gopher wood itself, there's some interesting speculation there in the sources. Why that specific wood?
Yeah, one source kind of went down a rabbit hole exploring ancient woods and their uses. It mentioned, for example, how Hollywood was supposedly used back then to make magic wands.
Wands for what?
For controlling people, apparently, which led that source to make this provocative connection.
Okay.
Well, if Hollywood was linked to control and manipulation, and Noah used gopher wood, which that source speculated might connect to a word meaning plan of salvation or word of salvation to build the actual means of salvation.
Ah, so you get this contrast. Tools for manipulation, maybe like Hollywood using media to influence culture today, versus the material God ordained for salvation.
Exactly. It's presented as a kind of modern allegory, contrasting building something for God's redemptive purpose using salvation materials versus using other means for control, power, manipulation. Back to that core spiritual conflict, serving God versus being your own God. It's speculative, sure, but it makes you look at gopher wood differently.
It does. And another key point, Noah didn't have to go out and round up all these animals from all over the world, did he?
No, the sources emphasize that too. The text says the animals came to him.
Wow.
It highlights God's direct involvement. It wasn't all on Noah's shoulders. God orchestrated bringing the creatures needed for the plan to the ark.
So after all those years of building, preparing, maybe facing ridicule, the time finally comes. Noah, his family, the animals, they enter the ark.
Yeah, the timing is precise again. Noah was 600 years old. They went in just before the rain started, right after that 7-day waiting period God gave.
Who exactly went in?
Genesis 7.1316 spells it out. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, plus all the animals. Clean by sevens, unclean by 2, fowl of the air by sevens, the male and the female. They all came in pairs, just as God had commanded Noah.
And the purpose was explicit, to escape the flood. The ark wasn't just a big boat. It was the only designated refuge, the means of rescue God provided from the judgment that was about to hit everyone else.
And this is where that symbolism, that typology gets really powerful. The ark itself is presented in the sources as a major type or symbol of Christ.
How so?
Just like the ark was the only place of absolute safety from the flood's judgment for anyone inside it, it serves as a type of Christ, offering safety and deliverance from judgment for everyone who is in him. The message, through this lens, is that salvation comes only through entering God's designated means of rescue, which Christian theology identifies as Jesus.
Wow. And Noah himself is also seen as a type of Christ.
Yes, the material highlights that too. Noah, the one righteous man in that corrupt generation, parallels Christ's perfect righteousness in a fallen world. Noah saved his family through obedience. Christ saves humanity. Noah's faithful obedience in building the ark, probably facing disbelief and mockery, foreshadows Christ's perfect obedience to God, even to the point of death.
So the ark, Noah, they're not just historical figures or objects. They're seen as pointing forward, foreshadowing the ultimate salvation in Christ.
That's the typological reading exactly. And then there's that crucial detail once they're all inside. And the Lord shut him in.
God closed the door. Not Noah.
Right. It emphasizes that the opportunity for salvation had a deadline, and access to that refuge was sealed by God himself when the time was up.
The door's shut. The time's up.
Yeah.
And then it begins. Genesis 7.1112 gives this vivid picture of the cataclysm starting.
And again, the timing is precise. When Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, right after the 7-day wait, and the sources really stress the dual source of the water. It wasn't just rain.
Right, it says, all the underground waters burst forth, or all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the rain fell, the windows of heaven were thrown open.
Water from below and water from above. This distinction is huge, and the sources offer some really fascinating, though, speculative ideas about what this meant for the planet.
Let's take the fountains of the great deep first. What's the thinking there?
The speculation is this describes the Earth's crust rupturing on a global scale, releasing huge amounts of subterranean water, maybe superheated, under massive pressure. One source used an analogy like breaking a chocolate egg filled with caramel. The shell cracks, the liquid inside just bursts out.
And how would that reshape the planet?
Well, the theory is this kind of cataclysm, the crust breaking, shifting violently because of the energy and water release, could actually explain things like plate tectonics, the rapid formation of mountain ranges, deep ocean trenches. The sources suggest the Earth's whole structure got fundamentally rearranged, like puzzle pieces being slammed together.
Okay, and what about the other source? The windows of heaven.
That's often interpreted, in the theories presented, as the collapse of a massive water vapor canopy that might have surrounded the Earth before the flood.
A canopy, like a layer of water vapor way up high.
Yeah, the idea is this canopy created a stable, warm, maybe tropical climate everywhere, like a giant greenhouse. And it would have also filtered out a lot of harmful cosmic radiation.
So if that collapsed, the consequences would be huge, not just rain.
Enormous, according to the speculation, losing that radiation filter. That's theorized as why human lifespans drop so drastically after the flood. More radiation means more cellular damage, faster aging,
Hmm.
and the collapse of that much water vapor would introduce massive weather systems, high and low pressure, causing strong, sustained wind for maybe the first time. And critically, it would let the intense cold of the upper atmosphere, even space, hit the surface, creating cold zones, maybe causing instant freezing.
And you said this connects to evidence found today.
Yes, especially things like those flash frozen mammoths found in Siberia and Alaska. The key thing often highlighted is they find undigested tropical or subtropical plants in their stomachs.
Right, suggesting they didn't freeze slowly over time.
Exactly. The argument is it points to an incredibly rapid, catastrophic freezing event, consistent with extreme cold suddenly falling from above, like a collapsing canopy might cause, rather than slow glaciation.
That's pretty compelling if it's a sudden violent event.
hmm And the sources also link the flood's sheer power to geology. One talks about flying over the Grand Canyon
Yeah.
and seeing it not as something carved slowly by that relatively small river, but looking more like a giant trench gouged out by an immense volume of water flowing rapidly, just on a mind-boggling scale.
Questioning if the Colorado River really did all that work over millions of years.
Right. The suggestion is maybe a single global catastrophic flood makes more sense for creating a feature that immense. Putting two and two together, as one source said, maybe the river is just flowing through the channel left behind, a remnant of the flood.
What about the Great Lakes?
Also speculated to be maybe divots, large depressions left as the floodwaters receded or water collected.
So the picture these interpretations paint is a planet utterly transformed, not just flooded, but geologically, structurally, climatically changed forever by this event.
That's the idea. The world Noah stepped out onto was likely vastly different from the one he left.
And the text gives the duration for the main rainfall, 40 days and 40 nights.
Yeah, and the water didn't just fall, it increased greatly, rising and rising. But the ark, it wasn't sunk by it, it was lifted. High above the earth, it floated safely. It was carried by the judgment waters, safe inside.
And the height of the water is emphasized too, covering even the highest mountains, reaching 20 feet or 15 cubits above the mountaintops.
That detail is critical. It underlines the flood was universal. There was no escape on land, no matter how high you climbed. The judgment covered everything.
Which leads to that inescapable, sobering consequence in verses 21 to 23.
This is the devastating outcome of all that wickedness. All the living things on earth died, the text repeats it. Everything died that lived on dry land. Every living thing wiped out. Birds, animals, wild, domestic, big, small, creeping things, and all people. Every last one of them gone.
The criteria was clear. Anything land-based that breathed air, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land, died.
That universality really drives home the scale of God's judgment against the sin and corruption that had just saturated creation. It was a total cleansing. And this loops back to the symbolism. The flood is undeniably divine judgment.
But not just judgment, right? The sources stress the dual nature.
Yes, it brought death to that corrected world, but it also acted as a purification, a cleansing of the earth itself, wiping away that deep-seated corruption to allow a fresh start. And this duality, judgment and cleansing, leads to that powerful allegorical link.
The baptism connection.
Exactly. The sources explicitly draw on how the Apostle Peter uses this imagery. The flood becomes a type of baptism. It represents a death to sin, the judgment destroying the old world, but also a resurrection to new life. The ark carrying Noah safely through those deadly waters to a new beginning. The waters bring death, but they also carry the saved to renewal.
And after this total wipeout, the text makes that stark contrast. Only Noah remained alive along with those who were with him in the boat. Only Noah remained alive and they that were with him in the ark.
Yeah, reinforcing that core message. When faced with God's universal judgment, the only safety, the only survival was in the ark, the specific place of refuge God provided.
And Genesis 7 closes by giving the duration the water stayed high.
The water covered the earth for 150 days. And it's important, as the sources note, this is how long the water prevailed, covering everything. They were actually in the ark much longer than that, which comes up later. But for 150 days, water ruled the land.
Okay, so let's pull this all together, thinking about the context, the commands, the cataclysm, the consequences, and especially looking through the lens of the sources we explored. This chapter is so much more than just a historical account. It's just brimming with these deep allegories and symbols.
Absolutely. We can sort of summarize those key symbolic typological connections.
Okay.
The ark itself, a powerful symbol, a type of Christ, God's provision, the only place of safety from judgment.
Right.
Noah himself, also a type of Christ. Righteous in a corrupt world, obedient, saving his family, pointing forward. The flood, clearly divine judgment on sin and corruption, but also the flood as cleansing, purifying the earth for a fresh start.
And the baptismal imagery, death to the old, passage through judgment waters to new life. Very powerful.
Yeah. And maybe even linking back temple symbolism, the ark, as this sacred space, God's presence dwelling safely with Noah, like a precursor to the tabernacle and temple.
So the core allegory running through it all is God's righteous judgment against sin, but woven together with his grace, his provision for salvation, the ark.
A timeless theological pattern. And remarkably, this ancient story, seen through these interpretive lenses from our sources, has some really practical, potent takeaways for us today.
Like what? How does this apply now?
Well, for one, environmental stewardship. The flood, maybe partly triggered by the corruption of creation itself, is a sobering reminder, as one source put it, of our responsibility to care for the world. It challenges us to think about our impact.
That makes sense. What about personally?
Morally, ethically, Noah's example, staying righteous when everyone around him wasn't, is presented as a model for maintaining moral standards despite societal pressure. How do you live with integrity when the culture pushes against it?
That's always relevant.
And the fact that Noah's family was saved together highlights the importance of family solidarity, community resilience in crises. Strengthening those bonds helps us endure tough times.
And the fact that so many ancient cultures have flood stories.
Yeah, it suggests this universal human experience of catastrophe, survival, renewal. Dealing with disaster is part of the human story everywhere.
And finally, the sources bring it all back to that core spiritual conflict we started with.
Yeah, the idea that belief isn't really about seeing enough proof. One source used Judas as an example. He saw Jesus' miracles up close,
Right, walked with him daily.
but still chose his own way, driven by gain money, greed, power, control.
That desire to be in charge, to be your own little god, which the sources call the same religion Satan introduced to Eve, the root of rebellion against God.
And this ties into the Antichrist concept, mentioned not just anti-good, but an alternative God saying, worship me instead, look what I offer. It mirrors those fallen angels trying to set themselves up, offering power and knowledge to usurp God's place.
So the message is that fundamental struggle is ongoing. It's always between recognizing God as the true source of authority and salvation versus chasing these alternative paths, control, power, self-worship, using spirituality for personal gain.
And it comes down to the heart's desire. Do you genuinely want to know God and follow his way, or do you fundamentally want to be in control yourself? Seeing proof isn't the issue. The want is.
So bringing it all home, Genesis chapter 7. When you really dive deep with these sources, it transforms. It's not a simple kid's tale. It's this profound story of universal judgment met with specific grace-filled salvation.
Yeah, packed with symbols, typology pointing to Christ, revealing deep truths about human corruption, divine judgment, God's redemption.
And it's not just ancient history. As the sources showed, these are powerful, practical lessons for you today. They challenge how you think about your choices, your responsibilities, your relationships, and ultimately, where you find your security.
That's right. The story poses timeless questions about facing chaos, about moral integrity, about community, and about where you place your ultimate trust.
The choice back then, in Genesis 7, wasn't just about literally getting on a boat. It was about recognizing the true source of authority and salvation when the world was full of corruption and, well, alternative claims to power. So maybe the question for us to ponder is, how do we make that same fundamental choice today in our own lives when our world is also filled with distractions and competing God's promise and control? And what does our response reveal about what we truly want deep down?